Idaho has more than 300,000 children in its public schools and almost 75,000 students in its post-secondary programs. Education takes up more than half of the state's budget, and Governor Brad Little made clear the state's commitment to education in his State of the State address.
We also have a moral obligation to all our youngest citizens. I subscribe to the view that it's better to prepare children today than to repair them later.
But are our children prepared? What are we doing to make sure our young people are getting the skills they need to succeed in the classroom, in the workforce, and in life? Join us for a look at Education 2020.
Education 2020 is made possible through the generous support of the Idaho Public Television Endowment, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen.
And I'm Kevin Richert with Idaho Education News. Last May, Governor Brad Little formed a task force to develop a 5-year plan to improve Idaho's educational system.
In November, the task force met to make its final report, leaving it to Governor Little and the state legislature to decide the direction of Idaho's educational system.
I've been on record all summer long favoring the idea that the state should compensate school districts for veteran teachers.
Updating the teacher's salary structure is just one of 5 final recommendations favored by Governor Little. And in his budget, Little urged lawmakers to increase veteran teacher pay.
A child's progress in all subjects, especially reading, depends upon the intention and instruction of a good teacher. We cannot simply rely on the good hearts of teachers any longer to retain an effective teaching workforce in Idaho. We must pay them competitively.
Little's budget also included $3.2 million to make last year's Literacy Initiative funding ongoing. That supports the task force's next recommendation, statewide accountability, focusing on K-3 literacy. The task force focus on early learning comes as Idaho's reading scores in kindergarten through 3rd grade have dropped. In the fall, about 42% of kindergartners were reading at grade level. The numbers are better for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders, but worse for Hispanic, Latino, and Native American students. Idaho's goal is that every student read at or above grade level by the end of 3rd grade. In his State of the State address, Governor Little reaffirmed his commitment to moving toward that objective.
When we commit to giving students a strong start, provide local school districts with the flexibility to determine how best to achieve it, we see progress. But still too many students across the state are falling behind. About 12,000 kindergartners are not on track to read when they show up on day one.
Little's budget gave a nod to one more of the task force's recommendations, addressing social and emotional issues. He proposes spending $1 million for training and additional resources to serve students facing issues like trauma and mental illness. That left 2 of the task force recommendations on the table: greater all-day kindergarten opportunities, and strategic alignment and increased flexibility in the K-12 funding formula. Though the task force only made 5 recommendations, educational leaders recognize that the state needs to consider other needs too, like improving college preparedness and providing career technical education programs that meet the needs of business today and the workforce of tomorrow. And joining us now to look at those task force recommendations and how they'll impact education in Idaho are Governor Brad Little, Debbie Critchfield, the president of Idaho State Board of Education, the state agency that oversees education in Idaho, and Sherry Ybarra, Idaho's superintendent of public instruction. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So we've all seen the task force recommendations, but let's start by having each of you give us a snapshot of where we stand in education in the state. What are we doing well, and what are the problem areas?
Well, I thought the task force did a great job. It was concise. It wasn't a litany of little things. It was 3 or 4 or 5 big things that were measurable goals that we could get to, and that's always a good way to start. Obviously, that was a report of a task force. Then it came to me, and now the legislature is looking at it. But It was something that almost all citizens and educators could understand.
What I appreciated about the task force and where we are now is that rather than our governor sitting down with a handful of policy experts that work in his office, he engaged stakeholders around the state, from the president of the parent-teacher organization to legislators to teachers. The Teacher of the Year was a part of that, to get a perspective on what do you value, what do you think is important as we look forward on improvement and increasing achievement. What are those things that we should prioritize? And then he was able to get a glimpse and a snapshot as to what Idahoans believe are important here in our state.
I was really excited for the recommendations that came out of the task force recommendations because, as President Crinchfield said, they were a view of what the state of Idaho is interested in. It wasn't just something in a vacuum that someone came out of their office and waved above their head and thought was a good idea. And they're things that the State Department of Education has been focusing on for a long time, things that we know are very important in this state, such as social emotional learning for our students, reading literacy, making sure kids have early learning opportunities before they come into kindergarten, and flexibility in our line items in the budget. So I'm really looking forward to working on these recommendations and very proud of the task force for the work that they've done.
Now, you've all embraced literacy as that top priority, and there's some successes at some schools around the state. But what are we going to need to do to build on the scores? I mean, we had scores drop coming into the fall. What do we need to do across the state to build on those scores and improve that situation?
Well, for me, you know, the three of us, we do need to encourage parents, communities, whatever, faith-based groups, to help get these kids up prepared for kindergarten. But when they show up at the front door of either kindergarten or the first grade, that's when we have, it's our responsibility. So what happens to test scores before they get there is unfortunate, and we need to, from our positions, to advocate for the communities and parents to do a better job of preparing for them. But as you alluded to, we have incredible successes where everybody's aligned in a school district in the K through 3 program to where they're all working together to get to that bogey, which is reading proficiency by the end of the 3rd grade. We're having enough success, Kevin's written about it, all over the state. If we duplicate that success everywhere, we're going to get there.
I think calling attention to literacy does something that it elevates the conversation. Schools know, and they work on literacy, they know that reading is important. You wouldn't find anyone in the state that would argue against why reading is important. But the task force and the governor has said this is a priority. We need to put our resources and our energies into looking at the readiness. And it's not just about kindergarten readiness, but it's also readiness at every grade so that students don't fall behind and we can close some of those achievement gaps. Something else that I'd call attention to that our board can influence is how we prepare the teacher to teach the child how to read. We know nationally that there's a lot of interest in literacy. And we're looking at other states that are having some marked success in how their teachers are prepared to teach reading. That is different than learning how to instruct other subjects. And literacy is infused in every subject. And so as we look at our colleges of education and our teacher prep programs, we're doing a review and an audit to understand and ensure that our teachers are prepared to teach kids.
Shouldn't kindergarten be mandatory? I mean, we're at the point now we know if we're going to have good prepared students, we should at least make kindergarten mandatory. Could you explain your position on it and why you believe what you do? Let's actually start with superintendent.
Well, kindergarten should, I'm not going to be the superintendent who's ever going to support anything that's mandatory, because I was the parent that exercised the parental right to send their child to school when they're 6 years old, but you have to remember I'm a teacher too. So what my child needed may not have been what someone else in the state of Idaho needed. I think what the focus needs to be on is opportunity. If your student has a deficit somewhere, and it might be language, it might be reading, then they need that opportunity for all-day kindergarten. And a lot of districts do offer that now as part of intervening with early literacy difficulties, and they do other things, all-day kindergarten, after-school programs. morning programs. And so I think it's more about opportunities, making sure that every student has the opportunity to exercise that versus making it mandatory.
How about you? Do you think kindergarten should be mandatory?
Governor?
Well, my job and the legislature's job is to allocate capital, to put resources. And I know that the $27 million that we had last year, that this year we're making ongoing, that districts are using it in different ways. The district right adjacent to where we're sitting right now, they will tell you they don't have enough classroom space if all their kindergarten kids showed up and they had to have them in there all day. So what we're doing is giving resources to them. Is if that district, if those trustees, if those superintendents, if the community there says all-day kindergarten's a secret to our success, to getting to literacy proficiency at the end of the third grade, they have that flexibility. But some of these kids, and of course, kindergarten isn't compulsory. One of the big issues is, does the community give enough opportunity to parents to where they choose, they select to have their kids go to kindergarten. So if in an ideal world, if I had lots and lots of resources, yes. But right now, because as we're working our way and using the IRI as our bogey, our hurdle to get to, I'd like given the flexibility of the communities to do what they, and a lot of them are selecting all-day kindergarten. More power to them.
And the IR is the Idaho Reading Indicator.
Yeah.
That's the test the kids take.
But schools cannot use state money to begin pre-K or to put towards a pre-K program. Is it now the time for the state to loosen up on the restrictions on pre-K to foster some of the partnerships that you were talking about, Governor, before?
Well, there are school districts that offer pre-K. They don't do it with state money, but they do it with other resources, and a lot of them, matter of fact, on both ends of the valley we're sitting in right now, Caldwell at one end and Basin School District at the other, they do offer pre-K, but it's back to allocating capital. I only have so much money that I have, and I believe that it's the wisest decision, and I can get it done. I can get it done with the legislature, I can get it done with the districts, I can get it done with the wide variety of disparity that I have with 115 school districts and 50 charter schools, giving them that money with the specific intent to reading proficiency at the end of the third grade. I can get that done, and we will.
I think we all know, and I think that you know, that Idaho recently received a sizable grant for the under 5 age group in the state. And that was a grant that was submitted that the governor, myself, and the superintendent all signed, signaling that we do believe that there needs to be more resources and more interest in that area. Something that I hear quite a bit from parents who maybe have a little bit of anxiety or hesitation about all-day kindergarten is the assumption that we want kids to come to school already reading. Pretty soon you're going to have 2-year-olds into school. That's not what any of us are talking about. Readiness is the appropriate grade level. For kindergartners coming in, go visit with a local kindergartner teacher. It's about recognizing colors and letters, and the superintendent, as a former teacher, could get more into detail on that. But we're talking about being ready to learn the standards, that you're not having to support or fill in a lot of gaps. When you start behind, it's a lot harder to catch up.
Well, let's talk about that federal grant a little bit more, because this is unprecedented. This is the first time the state has received federal grant money to look at pre-K. What do all three of you hope to learn at the end of that process? And maybe start with you, Superintendent Ibarra.
Well, I would like to add that's not the only grant that we do have. We have another one with the Waterford company that is working with school districts particularly. And what we are hoping to learn from that process is are the kindergarten or the students who participated in those programs coming in with less of a gap in their skills than other students who did not have the opportunity to attend those sorts of programs. I would like to say also to parents out there that are watching right now, there are other programs available in the state of Idaho. School districts are using their Title I funds to have programs like these. We do offer programs to migrant students, early learning opportunities, as well as special education students. So there are several different pockets of opportunities for parents if they see that there might be a gap for their student as they are entering school.
Let's shift gears to another big budget area, and that's teacher salaries. We've put $250 million into the career ladder over the past 5 years to boost teacher pay. Governor, you've suggested another $30 million for veteran teacher salaries and another $8 million to boost beginning teacher salaries. How do all three of you measure the return on investment? Because it isn't just about recruiting and retaining teachers. I mean, that's one of the objectives, but the ultimate objective is to recruit and retain teachers who help students achieve and perform. How do you measure all of that?
Well, obviously at the beginning of the process, it's literacy, it's the IRI, the Individual Reading Initiative. And then we have other benchmarks along the way to get to the task force goal of college and career ready. In my world, where I go out to school districts, where I talk to parents, where I talk to legislators, I believe that we are, as a state, because of the good work of the task force and the one before that, we are at a point to where we're in pretty good agreement about it. But we know it is about competitiveness. It's about sending a signal to our students that are in high school, that are thinking about going to college, to get into an education college, to be in the classroom. That, if we don't have competitive pay, we're not going to have our best and brightest get into that noble profession. And that's why, A, it is a signal to students to get into the profession, and B, it's a signal to the ones that are there that we're going to continue on our trajectory to be competitive. Your property taxes, the people of Idaho's property taxes, in many instances are directly tied to the need for supplemental levies to bring that pay up to be competitive. And so if you're concerned about property taxes, our proposal to be competitive is very important.
I want to build on that because I think that that's one of the lesser appreciated implications of the career ladder. As the governor's pointed out, we have local districts that are taxing local patrons to help supplement their general fund. And as school districts are able to free up more money within their general fund, they'd be able to offer optional kindergarten or possible pre-K opportunities or other needs that they determine, the locally elected board determines, are important. We hear consistently around the state that districts are supplementing the career ladder. They like it, they think that it's been effective and that it is serving the purpose that it was intended to serve. However, they're also building upon that, particularly for our more veteran teachers, more experienced teachers that have been in the classroom for a long time. And so local taxes go to support that, which I think signals the importance of education in those communities. And so as we look to have the state continue to support and build upon what we have in place, it allows districts to have opportunities and flexibilities within their general fund that they previously have not been able to have.
I would just like to add to that we are in the middle of a teacher shortage, not only nationally, but in the state of Idaho as well. And although there's some bright spots in education in Idaho, like we're ranked 5th in the nation for college and career ready, we're seeing increases in our state achievement tests, like the Idaho Reading Indicator that the governor mentioned, and our ISAT tests. We are still having struggles in areas with our special populations, like our special education students and our English language learners. And that is where, in Idaho specifically, that you will see the majority of the teacher shortage really hitting some districts pretty hard, like our rural districts. And so I want to thank the governor for really having a focus on our early educators and raising the starting teacher salary on the career ladder. But we've heard across the state that we really need to pay attention to our veteran teachers. And there's a saying in education, and it is most in need with most trained. And we're seeing our veterans, who are the most trained, leaving to go to other professions because they have the opportunity to go to other states where they could make a better income, or just going into a different profession for better salary. And so, we really need to keep that career ladder in place, and we really need to take the opportunity to focus on our veterans. I think that's a step in the right direction to end the teacher shortage.
So we evaluate teachers on student performance, but as superintendent, a teacher's job is not just teaching. They're a nurse, they're a counselor, they're a friend, they're the person that helps catch that social worker role. And how do you effectively reward teachers for that part of the job, because it's not easy to see, especially when kids are coming into a classroom hungry or cold or scared, and so they're not able to perform at their academic best.
I appreciate you recognizing that. So one, thank you as a former teacher. There's more to life than test scores. However, all teachers will tell you that they understand achievement is a huge part of the job, and so they don't shy away from that. The great thing about the task force is when we start talking about accountability and achievement, two things came out of there. One was they want to look at more of a motion picture of growth over time instead of just a snapshot in the days of the lives of our students, which is great because it speaks exactly to what you just said. What about all the things in the background that teachers do for students? And the other thing they wanted to take a really close look at, which is included in my budget, is the social emotional learning piece of a child's life. You know, if those needs aren't met, now to quote a participant from the task force, I participated in that, and I just, this really stuck in my head. Achievement and everything else goes out the window if a student's social and emotional needs aren't met. So teachers understand achievement's a big part of that, and they don't mind it, but I think these areas that the task force are focusing on will really pay homage to those things that are in the background for the lives of our students.
Let's talk a little bit more about the social emotional proposal, because you're all in agreement about it, but it's a new proposal. It would be a new program if it's funded. What does this training look like in your view? What are we going to see as parents, as taxpayers?
Well, let me broadly talk about it, and I'll let these two experts that know more about it than I do. But we just heard the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court talk about what we're going to do in Idaho and address the entirety of behavioral health. That we have these behavioral health issues that are causing me, as the allocator of capital, to spend more money on corrections and less money on K-12. I'd much rather do K-12 than I would corrections. But the entire behavioral health crisis issue is very broad, and we know that some of the problems that I have in corrections start with those kids at a very young age, that something happens. Something happens at home, something happens in their other life, something happens. Why wouldn't I want to get to the source of my problem that's causing, substance abuse problems, mental health problems? Again, it's on your property taxes. Why wouldn't I want to start in school where, with a little bit of investment and training that these two know way more about than I do, and that's to give those teachers the tools they need to address them as efficiently as possible? Why wouldn't I want to do that? Because it saves me money and saves society, and in fact saves lives later on.
I would like to add that to build on that, this is an ask from the educators' boots on the ground, and what they're saying is they are seeing an increase in kids coming to school with some sort of trauma-induced situation, and that affects behavior in the classroom, and so they want the best training available to be able to intervene early and often and de-escalate situations before they become those huge national ones that we're seeing. Heaven forbid that ever happen in Idaho. They also want training around helping kids with impulse control and learning how to work in teams and collaborate with one another and problem solving. And so I think it's the quote from the Teacher of the Year, the 2020 Teacher of the Year, that really sticks in my head. She is an advocate for social emotional learning, and what she always says is, it should be okay to tell somebody you don't feel okay. There shouldn't be a stigma around that. It should be okay to seek help. And the other quote that really sticks in my head is we had at the State Department of Education, we had a family and community engagement conference in which we invited Elizabeth Smart. And I think everybody knows that situation in Utah with Elizabeth Smart. And she said, quote, the abuse stops, but the trauma continues. And teachers want training and available trainings to work with their students around those sorts of issues so they can achieve and succeed in life.
Is $1 million going to be enough? I mean, that's what your budget asks for. Is that going to?
Well, no, but you don't just dump a lot of money at these things. You put some money out there get the best experts in the country to come look at it, and then get feedback from the school districts and the teachers about what works, and then you build on it over time. But you're never going to get there if you don't start, and this is a start.
I want to add to what is said. We know that local districts are finding local solutions and again are using general fund dollars for that. And I believe the interest of the state for this topic is to provide some leadership and some guidance. We here as a superintendent has said, how do we do this and how do we address that? We see community partnerships that are taking place with local clinicians that are helping local students. How do we navigate HIPAA and FERPA? How do we do some of these things? And so, believe it or not, I think our first steps are the most basic ones. Let's define what it is that we're trying to do, and then let's set some guidelines, some sideboards, and lead with, here are some ways to navigate the private and the public, student information, how we do that. The State Department of Education identifying what are those right teacher supports, and we start very simply and very basically, as the governor has said, and then as we know more and as we learn more and we find where we're most effective, then we can add more resources.
I need to jump onto our next topic, which is, as you kids a little bit older as opposed to the ones that are starting. That you have, Governor, in your budget, you were very supportive of college technical education program. In fact, we have a clip to show.
We are identifying what employers need in their workforce, and we are responding. High schools across the state are offering more and more career technical education programs, hand in hand with local businesses. This is especially important for businesses in rural Idaho that are more susceptible to a talent shortage. I'm recommending $6 million in the capital budget for new CTE facilities at the College of Eastern Idaho, Lewis Clark State College, the Department of Juvenile Corrections to strengthen our commitment to CTE in Idaho.
So in the second half of this program, we're going to hear from the presidents of the four-year institutions about the state of higher education. But I think it's important we hear from all three of you about where we stand in terms of college and career readiness. The state has spent a decade pushing a 60% goal, trying to get 60% of young adults to obtain a degree or a professional technical certificate. We're at 42%. What's getting in the way, and what is the path forward to moving that number upward?
Well, Kevin, when I actually, the state board started with a 60% goal, and then I wanted the legislature to be more aware of it. We did a resolution. But I've said in both the House and Senate side that some of the low-hanging fruit to get us to 60% is how we recognize those professional certificates. And I continue to argue that if you give one of these students a skill to where they can comfortably live and plan for retirement, isn't that part of our goal? There's arguments back and forth about what that certificate is, but we started several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, specifically paying for career counselors so that those kids can identify those CTE tracks and work into them. These programs have been a little slow to get going, but now we've got a lot of businesses in the communities that show up, and give them the diagnostic equipment to be a good mechanic or a auto body person, or in the construction industry, or welders. Almost everywhere we have a welding program, they get 100% placement when they walk out of the welding program. I think that to get to that 60% goal, we need to continue to make college accessible and affordable, but we also got to recognize more of those CTE careers, because what's important is that people can have a better livelihood, can comfortably plan for retirement, and we're doing that, but we're not recognizing that in that delta between 60 and 42%.
Is the state doing enough to promote CTE, though? Because the 60% goal is widely seen as a college completion goal. It's not. Your goal is to encourage post-secondary in a variety of ways. Is that word getting out?
We are in some districts. Some districts have got. I was in Idaho Falls last week, and those buildings are full of kids that literally have 100% placement. Now, some of the smaller school districts have a bigger problem, but But if you've got a specific industry, I talked about salmon in my State of the State, where they're taking those kids and teaching them to be cyber, trained up to be cyber, and they're grabbing those kids out of high school and giving them the skills where they can go anywhere in the United States to get a job at a starting level cyber job, which those are in huge demand.
I'm sorry, we only have about a minute left, and I want to give each one of you a last chance to answer. One last question. If you had the power, regardless of the money or whatever, what one change would you make in Idaho's educational system? Why don't we start with you, Superintendent?
Well, if I had the power, I would do a couple of things. I think that we had talked earlier about what teachers want and how can they often talk about how can they advance within their career. And so one thing that I would do is offer an opportunity for them to earn bonuses outside the regular workday, an overtime type situation. Because I know my spouse can work overtime. He works 12 hours a day, so he only works Tuesday through Friday, but he has the opportunity to work every Monday and earn overtime. So if some way we could change the system, I would offer bonuses or overtime pay for our teachers. The other thing I think that I would do if I could change one thing is we've started doing this, and it'll be a generational shift, but mastery-based education, and this would be for the kids of Idaho. Mastery-based education is project-based learning. It's shifting away from the desks in rows, teacher in the front of the classroom, worksheet type, 100-year-old system that we've seen. The system was built and everybody was thrown into that. I understand that. But the kind of kids that we are getting today want a different approach to their education. And I think that's how we do increase opportunities and CTE opportunities and kids who are getting certificates by changing the system. They want to accept responsibility for their learning. They want to be part of that. They want more real life situations that connect them to job opportunities. And so I would wave a magic wand and turn the entire system into a mastery-based education system for our students.
President, out of time, so.
Mine does not take any money. We just have to talk to the universe about creating some time. Time for teachers, time for parents. There's a lot of wonderful, effective things happening that people either don't know about or they simply don't have the time to do. And if we can help remove some of the barriers that impact why parents don't have time, they want to be involved in the classroom, but for a variety of reasons don't have time, and understanding what it is that we're doing and how they can access the great resources that are in place at this point.
All kids reading proficiently by the end of the 3rd grade.
He trumped all of ours. We want that too.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Idaho's higher educational system has bucked the national trend in 2 ways. First, while enrollment in 4-year institutions is down nationwide, enrollment in Idaho's higher ed schools went up. And second, the presidents of the 3 universities and Lewis Clark College did something to attack the problem of spiraling tuition costs.
Today marks a momentous day for higher education in Idaho. We are here today to announce a freeze in our in-state undergraduate tuition for the coming year.
This might be the first time in state history that Idaho's tuition rates haven't increased. On average, Idaho's in-state college tuition was about $8,000 an academic year. Not raising tuition means an estimated $16 million loss to higher ed. That's on top of a 3% budget cut ordered by Governor Little for all state agencies. Satterley, speaking for his fellow presidents, said all of Idaho's higher ed institutions are operating in uncertain times, facing cost increases, competition from out-of-state universities, and student concerns about the impact of education debt. But the presidents and the State Board of Education agreed freezing tuition was a necessary step to make college more affordable.
Balancing those financial constraints with this focus of affordability is not going to be easy, but we are committed to it.
The State Board of Education is looking at other ways to reduce higher education costs. Called Systemness, this is a concept to use collective purchasing and unified contract management for all of higher ed, and to save other money through workforce consolidation.
There is a shared commitment among all of us to create an environment and an ecosystem where our higher education institutions work together, and we better serve the people of Idaho by helping students pursue a better life.
And joining us now to discuss the future of higher education in Idaho are the presidents of the state's 4 four-year institutions. Kevin Satterlee of Idaho State University, Marlene Tromp of Boise State University, C. Scott Green of the University of Idaho, and Cynthia Pemberton of Lewis Clark State College.
Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Let's start. You all agreed on the tuition freeze as a way of making college affordable. How do you define success from here on out? Is there a goal that you have for this program, and how's it going to help in retention rates?
Well, I think the way we have discussed it and the way we've discussed it with both the State Board of Education and amongst ourselves is that it's about the issue of making sure that we have a sustainable long-term funding model for Idaho's higher education system. And it isn't all about tuition. It's about the proper role of tuition, proper role of state support, and working with our state leaders, both the State Board of Education, the Governor's Office, the legislature, to come to an understanding about how is the best way to fund higher education going forward. And I think those conversations are going to bear fruit over the next several years.
How would each of you like to fund higher education? Where do you see that road going?
Well, I think it has to be a combination. The state has to, provide some support. We are state public universities. Obviously, scholarships are also helpful, whether they be merit or need-based. We need to make education as affordable as we can for every student in Idaho who wants to go on to college. So we measure success by reaching those people and making it affordable for them to actually attend our universities.
Because there is a cost attached, obviously, to a tuition freeze, because ultimately you're only getting money either from the taxpayers or from parents and students. So as you implement this freeze, how is that affecting your bottom line this year?
Well, for us at Lewis Clark State, there will be challenging decisions that will be made. And we have to be incredibly efficient, incredibly effective, and we have to, in many ways, stay true to the core value of education and what we're about and serving students in that way. And there may be some things that we'd like to do, ice cream with your cake, that has to sit on the shelf for a while as we stay true to that core.
There's a tipping point, though, if you freeze tuition and you have budget cuts and you have lower student enrollment, and that you hit the point where we start seeing an impact on student programs. Are we at that point, or are we going to be at that point?
Well, I think for our institution, we're at that point. We are looking at the elimination of positions and programs at the University of Idaho. We've been running deficits for the last couple of years. They've been substantial, and so we're working very hard as a community to what I call balance our checkbook and replenish our savings account. So for us, we are at that point.
Go ahead, Marlene. I think all of us are facing real challenges, and I think higher ed nationally is facing real challenges. And a part of that is a rethink. How do we ensure that we are genuinely efficient and that we are really striving to make sure that we're making the best use of every dollar? And a part of it is also ensuring that since we know more about how students learn, we're actually better at delivering education than we used to be. 30 years ago, we delivered education in a very different way. I always say that I went to school with a spiral notebook and a pencil, and now we have an IT infrastructure, and we would be doing a disservice to our students if we didn't give that to them. And that's much more costly than having a student bring their own notebook and pencil. So there are costs that are a part of the way that higher ed is actually improving. It's not a failure. And so there are pinches there, but there are also new ways that we're looking to achieve revenue. We have generous donors that support all 4 of our institutions. We are always looking for partnerships that will help us advance the institution. So for example, we just are in the midst of building a materials research facility on our campus that's been an incredible partnership with Micron. It's going to produce incredible graduates who will go on and work in that kind of industry, but it's also supporting the university. And so there are ways in which we're always looking for new ways to be more effective at using the dollars we have, and sometimes those are more costly ways to move forward, but also we're always looking at other sources too.
There's also the question, though, of how you distribute the money that the state does put into higher education, the discussion of outcomes-based funding. President Satterley, you talked about that some at the State House this week. It sounds like you're ready to have the conversation about tying some of the funding to outcomes like completion and degree, graduation rates and the like.
We are, and I think all four of us are. There are several models by which you can fund higher education, and the concept of outcomes-based funding showing that we are producing students who are graduates who get that certificate, that credential, that degree to go out to become employee, to go out to become a productive member of our communities, and we're all fine with that as a level of measurement. There's some work to do in that formula about how you do that, but we understand that in the role of public higher education, that's our job, is to help these students reach that educational goal. So for the state to say we're going to hold you accountable to that goal, we're fine with that. So we want that conversation to move forward.
And I would add to that I've lived under an outcomes-based model before in Arizona. That's the model that we operated under. And I understand the benefits of that, and I'm comfortable with it, as we all are. It's just about what exactly the components of that model are. But I also want to alert us to the fact that all of the traditional notions of graduation rates, excuse me, are built upon a much older model of what higher ed looked like. A traditional age student who came from a very privileged background and went to school for 4 years. Now most of us have students who have jobs, many of whom have families, and we don't want to punish a student or see it as a failure if a student doesn't complete in 4 years, because it may well not be. It may be that that student is doing incredible things while they're working full-time, while they're raising their family. And so we want to continue to respect our students and be flexible in how we understand their success as well.
And that they're not returning for a traditional 4-year degree often. It's for a particular credential or certificate or program, and making sure that those outcomes are just as valuable as a traditional baccalaureate program.
Absolutely. We really need to meet students where we are, and we need to celebrate their journey and their outcome success at the end, whether it takes 2 years, 6-week certificate, 4 years, 8, 12, etc. Education is not the package the way it was historically, and whatever outcomes we use to try to benchmark our institutional and state successes need to be mindful that it's a different world and a different model of education. And if we're going to be effective with students of all kinds, from all areas, we need to be able to adapt to that.
Now, the legislature's put a considerable amount of money into the Opportunity Scholarship, and they've opened up some of the funding for those adult completers, those students who are coming back to college after going to work or starting a family. But it's still not enough. It's still not meeting the entire need. And that puts pressure on all four of you to fill in some of that funding gap. So how are you doing that?
So for us, we have what's called the Vandal Promise, and basically we are looking to raise money to close that funding gap between what the legislature provides, what scholarships can provide, whether they be merit or need-based, and Pell Grants provide. And for our institution, that's about $5,000. So we're out raising money to help bridge that gap. And we already have a couple dozen in that program who just completed last fall. We already know we're going to at least double that program next year. We have commitments already, and it's my primary fundraising priority. So I expect that number to continue to grow. So for us, that's very important that we provide access to our students within the state, and for us, that's a very important program to get that accomplished.
And our scholarship programs are just like our other programs. We have to remain constantly up to date with the needs. A traditional scholarship program doesn't work for all of those students who aren't in the traditional mold. So we're reviewing those as well. When the state board talks about program review and program prioritization and criteria, they aren't just talking about academic programs. It's many of the programs we have on our campus, and that's one of the things that we're working on to echo what Marlene and Cynthia were saying. Our scholarship programs need to remain up to date and current and modern as well, and so we're working on those too.
Utah's making a flip from looking at making the flip from merit-based to need-based? Is this something that we should flip here in Idaho?
I think that's going to require a lot of thought and analysis, but I do think that we're becoming increasingly conscious. Like Scott, I'm fundraising. My primary fundraising goal has been around raising scholarship funds, and it's to make sure that we're covering the need gap. And on our campus, that's called the True Blue Scholarship. In fact, what I'm dedicated to doing is to build an endowment for that scholarship so that it's self-renewing. And I dedicated my inauguration this year. We had a gala for my inauguration, and all the funds we raised for that went into that True Blue Scholarship. And we've raised nearly $500,000 already in the first 6 months. So the goal is to try to cover that need gap, because we know that when we can meet that need gap, we have much higher rates of student success. It's one of the primary reasons that students stop out of school.
Addressing the affordability issue is something we've talked about a lot. It's why the tuition freeze is important and why these other programs are just as important as well.
So with the exception of Boise State, enrollment at all your facilities are down, your institutions are down, and nationally, college enrollment has fallen 11% over the last 8 years. And worse, an Associated Press poll said that 4 in 10 young people between the ages of 13 and 29 believe a bachelor's degree prepares people only or poorly for today's economy. So in this environment, how are you going to attract the students you need?
I think one of the things that we need to do, and conversations like this are a good starting point for that, is we need to change the narrative so that it is informed and it is accurate. Every study reveals that not only is higher education a dollar value over the working life of an individual, but it also is a quality of life value for the individual and for the communities that those individuals live in. And so I think part of the puzzle for that is that we need to be bold, we need to be assertive, and we need to clarify and correct the negative narrative, because it just isn't accurate, and it's doing our students, our state, our nation, frankly, a real disservice.
Scott has the best answer for that. It is.
Scott,
it's great.
yes.
Well, you know, I like to say, and I thought they were tired of hearing about it or not, is that, you know, higher education makes you healthier, wealthier, and wiser. And it makes you healthier, and all the studies show this, that you'll live longer lives with less health issues. You're less likely to smoke and other issues around that. You'll be wealthier. You'll make well over $1 million more over your lifetime. And depending on how far you go on education, that can increase pretty dramatically. And because of that, you'll pay more in taxes and give back more to the community. And finally, you're wiser. You engage more in your community, and you help create change and get involved and make for a better world. So, you know, higher education is the silver bullet. We just need to get our story out there a little bit better and let people know that what they're giving up if they don't go on to higher education.
And Idaho is bucking the trend in terms of high school graduates around the country. That rate is dropping in other states, but in Idaho it's increasing. So 2 things are going to happen. There are enough students in Idaho that if we can impact the go-on rate and impact that narrative that they need to go on, we will have the students we need. But what's going to happen is other states are going to try to take our best and brightest graduates because they don't have enough students, and they're going to try to attract them out of Idaho. That's why programs like the Opportunity Scholarship and others like that to say to Idaho kids, you need to go on and you need to stay here to do it and make sure you stay in our communities. Those are going to be very important in the future.
But a lot of this, as you've all kind of alluded to, is the narrative and trying to advance that narrative with students and with families where college hasn't been part of the conversation. Rural students, first-generation students, and several of you are first-generation students yourselves, students of color. How do you make that case in 2020? How do you go into the communities and change the dialogue about higher education?
I think that really requires a few things, and I'm sure my colleagues will have other things to add, but one of the things we've talked about is how can we do an ecumenical media campaign that isn't about just come to one of our schools. You know, I went and judged the stinky sneaker competition between Meridian and Mountain View High School. It's a spirit contest on their campus that they have during basketball season, and I spoke to the students, and it was just, the gymnasium was just packed. In fact, they broke an attendance record. And what I said is, I don't care where you go, but go on. And we want to send that message, but it is more than that, as you're suggesting, Kevin. So first of all, we want to work together to help increase that go-on rate, but it means really giving people the kinds of facts that Cynthia was describing. People just don't know the data. You know, I every time I'm in an airport and I walk by a newsstand and it says, is higher education worth it? I'm like, look, the data is in. We know unequivocally that it is. It is for states, it is for the individuals who go. But if we're not communicating that message, then there's a missed opportunity there, particularly with those first-gen and rural families. And all of us are very conscious about reaching out to those communities now, too.
You've talked about systemness as a way of trying to enhance cooperation and collaboration amongst communities. Could you define what systemness is?
Well, on the starting point, it's the fact that we're all working together. It is systemness in the fact that we are talking about joint degree programs that we can offer together. We're talking about joint research cooperation that we can do. It's the fact that when I talk to groups of students, I say things like, I hope you come to Idaho State, but more important than coming to Idaho State is that you go on. And if you want the programs or you want the experience at one of our sister institutions, that's where you should go. It's the fact that we are talking like that as a group, and that we are talking about what can we do to impact the go-on rate, to impact that value proposition, not what can I do or what Idaho State can do, but what we can do as a group. That's true systemness. It's not about some organizational efficiency or some org chart. It's about how we work together in cooperation, and that's, I think, the spirit you're seeing from us.
But at the same time, at the same time, you're trying to preserve the uniqueness of your four institutions because they're all very different. They serve different needs in different student populations.
Well, and that's really part of sort of the bedrock of our systemness collaborations, and that is that we recognize that because we are both, all four of us are unique, we are both unique and yet serving the same core value of education, we create a fabric that knitted together serves students in our region so that different people with different needs and different options and opportunities are available, because between the 4 and even 8 actually, if you include the community colleges, we really can meet the needs of students from across our state in meaningful and comprehensive ways, and recognizing that we're all different ingredients to the whole, and the whole is strong because of that.
There was a time in Idaho's history, being a huge state, geographically diverse in the way that the state is set out geographically, that having separate institutions and separate regions made sense, and we used to be a long way apart from one another. In 2020, we aren't apart from each other at all. We are in the same communities. We have the connectivity, we have the online, we have the ability to operate together. And so it's time to get past what used to be the regionalism of separate institutions and separate locations and talk about what we can do together.
So in the past 6 months, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of backlash about inclusion programs on campuses, diversity programs on campuses. And I want to take a step back from the question a little bit. Does this suggest something bigger? Does it suggest a more broad skepticism or suspicion about higher education in America in 2020? And I'll throw that out to any of the 4 of you who want to take a stab at it.
I do think that there's a sense, and when we talked about the declining go-on rate nationally that you were describing, Kevin, there is a sense that higher ed doesn't have something to offer, and that is higher ed. I think we understood so clearly and so well because we see that transformation with students all the time. When you're in the classroom and on the campus and you watch people change their lives, you don't have any question about the value of what you do. But we weren't talking about it enough to the world outside the university. And so we all recognize that there's a part of the puzzle that has driven some of these other questions that just is based in a skepticism of higher ed fundamentally. I think some of those other questions have focused in on a specific part of our work without understanding all the different kinds of supports that we supply for students. And that the more we talk about what we're doing, and as we've called it, our value proposition, and the more people see all the ways we support students, rural students, first generation students, many Idaho students are first generation. And we want to help all those folks. Many of them are rural. So the more we talk about all that we do and the way we bring value, I think the more it'll start to change that conversation too.
Absolutely.
You're all basically new to higher education in Idaho to a certain extent. You decided to move here, or you to stay here or return here. What made you have the decision, since the first time we've gotten you all four together in one studio, to come here at this challenging time and take on these jobs? And just start at the end.
For me, interestingly, I was just asked this question earlier, and in a meeting with one of the legislators, and I said, the answer is very clear and very direct. I was a first generation, low income student with a single mom on public assistance, and I went to a small school where people knew who I was and what I was doing and paid attention to me. And because I had that foundation and was launched in that way, it was the right place for me in that time, a place where I could figure out how to survive and then thrive. I've had an incredible life experience and a wonderful journey. And so for me, it's very clear and direct. 76% of the students at Lewis Clark State College are first gen. Half of them are Pell eligible. I have an opportunity here to serve the students who were like me, and hopefully create some kind of a foundation, a platform for them to have lives of wonder and exploration and adventure and success.
We're rapidly running out of time.
Yeah. So for me, it really is about coming back to an institution I care deeply about. I was born in Moscow. I grew up on the campus there. My grandfather was a professor there, an athletic director. My dad was going to law school when I was living there in Moscow. And they've got a number of challenges. We have a number of challenges. We've gone through a number of presidents. So I'd hope to bring some continuity and a chance to turn the tide there and really give back to the institution that gave me so much.
President Trump.
Growing up in a town in Wyoming that I didn't even know that people would call rural, because everything in Wyoming feels rural. I'm just really committed to the kind of students that we see in the state of Idaho, and Boise State for me was one of the most exciting institutions in the country. It's been innovative and creative, and it's open to thinking in new ways, and for me that meant I think we can find better ways to serve the students here in Idaho, and I'm excited about that.
You have the last 30 seconds.
I grew up in small town Idaho, spent my time in our public school system and got my education there. I'm an alumni member of 2 of my sister schools and being president of one of our institutions to help other kids who are like me growing up in rural Idaho get their education. That's why I'm here.
Appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like more information about the task force recommendations, data about Idaho's elementary and secondary schools, and information about Idaho's college and technical educational opportunities and its 4-year institutions, check out the Education 2020 website. You'll find it at idahoptv.org. And thank you for joining us for this look at Education 2020.
Education 2020 is made possible through the generous support of the Idaho Public Television Endowment, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and viewers like you. Thank you.